In the aftermath of World War II, the world emerged victorious yet precariously balanced, teetering on the edge of a new kind of conflict, one that would not be fought merely on battlefields, but in the realms of ideology, economy, and technology. The war had ended, but a far more insidious struggle was just beginning. The formation of the United Nations in 1945 was hailed as humanity's bold attempt to prevent future catastrophes. Its charter promised peace, collaboration, and global governance. But beneath the noble ideals, the seeds of tension were already sown. The UN structure, dominated by the Big Five with their veto powers, became a lightning rod for geopolitical rivalries. What appeared to be a forum for cooperation gradually transformed into a theater of subtle power plays, where the real battle was not for territory, but for influence. Even as nations tried to rebuild from the ashes of global destruction, the ideological divide was widening. The communist tide swept across Eastern Europe and parts of Asia. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and China came under the growing influence of Soviet communism. For the Western powers, especially the United States, USA, this was not just a political threat. It was an existential challenge. The world had shifted dramatically. The map of influence was redrawn with iron lines and invisible borders, and the stakes had never been higher. Germany, once the epicenter of industrial innovation and military might, had been divided into two. West Germany, aligned with Western democracy, and East Germany, firmly under Soviet control. Berlin, the divided capital, became the haunting symbol of Cold War hostilities. Families were split, lives uprooted, and the ideological chasm became a daily reality for millions. The Berlin Wall, eventually erected in 1961, was not just a barrier of bricks and barbed wire. It was a monument to fear, oppression, and the lengths governments would go to control their citizens. Amid this turbulence, the United States, USA, sought to contain the spread of communism through bold initiatives. The Truman Doctrine of 1947 marked a turning point in American foreign policy. It pledged military and financial support to nations threatened by communist expansion. Initially focused on Europe, it soon extended to Asia, signaling that the USA was positioning itself as a bulwark against the global spread of communism. Economic power became the weapon of choice. In 1948, the Marshall Plan was launched, injecting massive economic aid into war-torn Western Europe. Beyond reconstruction, it was a strategic tool to prevent Soviet influence from spreading. The rebuilding of industries, ports, and infrastructure became more than just recovery. It became a front line in the ideological battle between capitalism and communism. But the Cold War was not limited to economics or diplomacy. It had real, tangible moments of confrontation. The Berlin blockade of 1948 saw the Soviet Union attempt to choke off West Berlin, testing Western resolve. In response, the Berlin airlift emerged as a testament to endurance and ingenuity, with planes delivering supplies for almost a year, defying Soviet pressure. Every flight, every ton of coal and food was more than logistics. It was a message. Freedom could not be starved into submission. Fear and paranoia permeated American society. The House of Un-American Activities Committee, WAC, formed in 1947, hunted suspected communists in government and Hollywood. Careers were destroyed, lives ruined, and a culture of suspicion became the norm. The execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg in 1953 for espionage further inflamed debates about national security versus personal liberty. Americans began to question the very essence of freedom, even as they championed abroad. The Korean War, 1950-53, marked the first hot conflict of the Cold War. North Korea, backed by communist powers, invaded South Korea, forcing the UN and the United States, USA, to intervene. The war was brutal, with mountainous terrain and harsh winters adding to the human cost. Millions of lives were lost, and the Korean Peninsula became a stark reminder that the Cold War was not a distant, abstract battle. It was real, bloody, and immediate. As Europe watched, the Hungarian Revolution of 1956 erupted, a desperate struggle for freedom against Soviet oppression. Though ultimately crushed, the revolution highlighted the deep human yearning for autonomy, even in the face of overwhelming force. Around the same time, the Suez Crisis revealed the fragility of European colonial power and the complex interplay of Cold War superpowers. illustrating that conflicts were no longer just local. They had global repercussions. Technology became another battlefield. The launch of Sputnik by the Soviet Union in 1957 shocked the United States, USA, sparking the space race. Suddenly, scientific achievement was intertwined with ideological supremacy. Every satellite, every rocket, every scientific breakthrough was a demonstration of national strength and technological dominance. The race to the stars was as much about ideology as exploration, proof that the Cold War was shaping every aspect of human endeavor. The 1960s brought new crises. The U-2 incident, where an American spy plane was shot down over Soviet territory, exposed extensive espionage operations and deepened mistrust between the superpowers. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world perilously close to nuclear war. For 13 tense days, the planet teetered on the edge of annihilation. It was a stark reminder that the stakes of this ideological battle were existential, far beyond borders or resources. In Asia, the Vietnam War escalated from a regional conflict into a global symbol of Cold War tension. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964 led to increased USA involvement, while the Tet Offensive of 1968 exposed the war's brutal realities to the American public. Despite military victories, public opinion turned against the conflict, highlighting the moral complexities and the cost of ideological battles fought thousands of miles away from home. By 1975, North Vietnam successfully unified the country under communist rule, marking a bitter defeat for USA policy and a sobering lesson about the limits of military power in shaping ideology. In the Soviet bloc, the Brezhnev Doctrine formalized the USSR's commitment to maintain control over Eastern Europe. Democratic movements were suppressed, national sovereignty was curtailed, and intervention became a policy. The Cold War's ideological lines were enforced not just by armies, but by doctrines, policies, and fear. Meanwhile, in the West, Ronald Reagan's election in 1980 heralded an aggressive stance against the Soviet Union, branding it the evil empire, and supporting anti-Soviet forces globally. These pressures contributed to the eventual unraveling of the USSR and signaled the approaching end of the Cold War. By the late 1980s, Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms of perestroika and glasnost ushered in an era of unprecedented change in Eastern Europe. Nations once under Soviet control moved toward democracy, freedom, and self-determination. The Berlin Wall fell in 1989, symbolizing not just a collapse of physical barrier, but the end of decades of ideological oppression. But the echoes of these conflicts persisted. The Gulf War in the early 1990s demonstrated how unresolved tensions and alliances from the Cold War era could spark new conflicts. In 2001, the attacks of September 11 shifted the global security paradigm, leading to the war on terror and interventions in Iraq and Afghanistan. These events were not isolated. They were the ripples of ideological battles that had been simmering for decades, reshaping international relations and global priorities. Even in peacetime, economic forces played a pivotal role. The Great Recession highlighted how interconnected global economies could impact national policies, international relations, and the balance of power. It was a reminder that the Cold War had taught the world more than military strategy. It had revealed the power of finance, technology, and ideology as weapons in their own right. From the division of Berlin to the launch of satellites, from the Korean Peninsula to the desert of Iraq, from Germany's industrial legacy to USA's technological dominance, the world witnessed a transformation unlike any before. Wars had evolved. Bullets and bombs were no longer the only tools. Ideology, economic leverage, technological superiority, and the human spirit had all become battlefields. As history looks back on the 20th century, one truth becomes clear. The battles for freedom, ideology, and power were deeply intertwined. Nations rose and fell not only by the strength of their armies, but by their ability to innovate, influence, and survive in a rapidly changing world. The conflict of the post-World War II era were not just about nations. They were about the future of civilization itself. And while the Cold War ended, the lessons remain. Today, technology, finance, and global alliances continue to shape our world, echoing the struggles of the past. From the phones in our hands to the satellites above our heads, From global corporations to the delicate balances of international politics, the legacy of Germany and the United States, USA, remains ever present. The story of the post-World War II world is a reminder that wars are rarely just about flags or borders. They're about ideas, resources, power, and survival. And the most enduring battles, those that truly shape history, are often fought not in the open, but in the shadows, behind closed doors, and in the minds of those who dare to plan the future.